everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. I hope you find a lovely haunting time here. And if you're not new here, it is great to have you back. In tonight's episode of Haunted History, we will be talking about the Searcy Hospital. Searcy Hospital is located in Mobile, Alabama, and the other name for it is also Mount Vernon. Before we get started in more details about Searcy Hospital, I do want to make note that I am using resources for this, and I will link every resource I use in the description down below. I do also want you to keep in mind that this is haunted history, as in all of the information that I will be reporting is the history behind haunted places within the United States and other countries. I will be conducting research and probably even deeper research into some sites if I am able to. However, I do want you to keep in mind that this is not about ghost stories. This is about, again, haunted locations. I also want to quickly note that this is what they called a mentally ill hospital. So I do want you to keep in mind that there could be disturbing content coming ahead. All right, so with all of that being said, let's go ahead and jump into this haunted history of Mount Vernon, also known as Searcy Hospital. First, we are going to start with the timeline of events happening at this specific location, just so that way we can get a better understanding from the past all the way up to its closing in 2012. So with our first resource, it is from AL.com, and the writer of this resource is Kelly Keswick. A little side note, Kelly did actually get permission and under the supervision of the State Department of Mental Health in order to conduct this research. Now, we're at the site of Mount Vernon Arsenal. There are more than 30 historic buildings that are there, so keep in mind that this isn't just one place. The Mount Vernon Arsenal was founded in 1828. But first, we must go all the way back to 1811. In 1811 is when Mount Vernon Cantonment became a military encampment. This military encampment was set 3 miles inland of Fort Stoddart, hoping to avoid mosquitoes. During the War of 1812, General Andrew Jackson actually occupied Mount Vernon Cantonment. This area was also used as rendezvous for the Federal Army during the Creek Wars as well. Moving fast forward to 1828, Congress actually authorized the construction of Mount Vernon Arsenal. Now, this was just one of 14, but these were all used as defense. But they were manufacturing and storing arms and ammunition. But going on to 1830s, they actually started to build a more horseshoe layout with more buildings. It wasn't until 1836 when the arsenal buildings were completely finished. But they also added in a 12-foot high brick wall. However, it wasn't until January of 1861 when the Alabama militia actually took over Vernon Arsenal by the command of Governor Barrymore. It wasn't until this time that the Confederacy took over the Mount Vernon Arsenal. However, when the war ended in 1865, Mount Vernon Arsenal was turned over to Fed control. And then in 1865 to 1894, a second building was being built at the site. However, it was then assigned to be barracks for the 2nd Regiment of the U.S. Infantry in 1873. And then between 1887 and 1894, the arsenal was home to about 400 Chiricahua Apache natives. And if I botch the enunciation for that name, I do apologize. But going back to the usage for those natives, they were actually prisoners of war. However, they were never charged with war crimes. So they were basically being held against their will. Between 1887 and 1890, Dr. Walter Reed was the U.S. Army physician who at that time confirmed that yellow fever was transmitted by mosquitoes, but so he was posted at the site as the post surgeon, and he worked with the Apaches. And however, in 1895, the Mount Vernon was then transferred to the state of Alabama. Between 1895 and 1900, the entire site was not being used. But now we get into the early 1900s, where we come into it turning into Mount Vernon Hospital for the colored insane. Now, we're not going to be going into too much horrific detail as to how colored people were treated at Mount Vernon Hospital in the early 1900s, but we will be getting into the details later on. I do want to take a quick little mini break as we dive deeper into the darker times of Mount Vernon Hospital, because the language I am using is the language that they were using. I in no way, shape, or form agree with these terms. It is just the terms that they used back in the day, and it's just to help you and I understand just how deeply into how these hospitals just didn't really care for mental health issues, what we call it today, because it is mental health issues. You're not mentally insane, and mentally ill has a negative connotation to it, from how it's been used from people. And then, it's just that ripple effect, oh, you're mentally ill in a negative way. So I do want to inform my listeners that I do believe in calling it mental health, and you're not insane for having a mental health issue. So that's just a little disclaimer that I do want to put in this podcast, only because it gets it gets really dark as far as terms go. But again, it's just to help you and I understand just how far these hospitals go with not only the physical abuse, but also mental abuse, by calling them insane and ill, sick, because of being certain things like being gay or stuff that you can not even dangerous to other people, along with I have a learning disability. That was one on the list. Depression, you would be put in a mental hospital for those things without consideration of proper treatment. So I just want to get that out there, because this is going to get really dark. Maybe not in this episode. I will probably do a part 1 and part 2, but that's this will be the end of this little break. I know it's a little bit long, but this is just an understanding of just how dark this is going to get. So hang on tight or stop listening. It's up to you, but there is going to be tough language ahead of us. getting back to our story, in 1900, there were new buildings that were being constructed under the money of $25,000, which in those times was a lot. It wasn't until 1902 that the first patients and staff actually do arrive. In 1906, there was a new disease called Italian pellagra. It actually consists of blisters to extremities and suicidal thoughts. The belief was it most likely came from eating, quote, Indian corn, Indian corn, unquote, or another term, dried corn. This was stated, or according to Dr. Dr. Kumaravel Raja Kumar of West Virginia University. However, it wasn't until Dr. George H. Searcy, who actually conducted a study of the patients, and he found that it was actually caused by ingesting moldy cornmeal, and that wasn't fed to the nurses. This was actually one of the first intensive studies of the disease in the U.S., and this was in, again, 1906 by Dr. George H. Searcy. However, this was an initial hypothesis of other doctors. He was just the one that confirmed this hypothesis. Jumping forward to 1919, the hospital was actually renamed Searcy Hospital after Dr. J.T. Searcy, who worked with Peter Bryce from, you guessed it, Bryce Hospital in Tuscaloosa. Dr. J.T. Searcy was the first superintendent at Mount Vernon. A little side note, isn't it interesting how Tuscaloosa and Mobile just like connected like this? That's honestly, I'm living for it. I love it. Getting back to the story and jumping to 1963, the first in-house surgery established at Searcy Hospital. It was established so that the patients didn't have to be referred to other facilities for procedures. And it wasn't until 1969 that Searcy Hospital was desegregated, and then white patients were admitted. And then that's when the black patients were beginning to be admitted to Bryce Hospital. Now, I have touched on Bryce Hospital a little bit in the past. I will link that down below. But I do want to dive deeper into Bryce Hospital and the history behind it and just give a clear review of that. And then, but knowing this about Searcy Hospital will give me a bigger view, which is just great. I love it. In 1986, the Mount Vernon / Searcy Hospital, that site was named in the National Register of Historic Places. And it wasn't until 2012 when Searcy Hospital and Bryce Hospital closes for good. And it wasn't until June 2016 when Michael W. Panhorst, he is the coordinator of Alabama's Places in Peril list at that time, and he researched the sites, and he gave recommendations on how we can preserve these historic sites. He presented these recommendations to the State Department of Mental Health. Now that is it for the timeline from AL.com, written by Kelly Kazek. I just want to go ahead and mention the source again as we are ending this specific source. And other sources will be stated, but I think I honestly want to end this episode here, only because we talked about the timeline of everything, how everything got started, and how it ended up to where it was when it closed and in 2012. So we will end this episode here, actually, and just stay tuned for part 2 when we dive into deeper history of the Searcy Hospital. But I will reclaim the disclaimers in the other video soon before I start speaking on history, because Bryce's hospital history was really, really dark, and so I expect this to be really, really dark. So just hold on tight to your shoes, and I guess we're going to start running to the next episode soon. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed, learned a few things a bit, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks, guys. Bye.